Bueno, para mí es un placer presentaros a Roger Levien, un experto en nuevas tecnologías en que en los últimos años se ha especializado en nuestro mundo, en el mundo del libro y especialmente en las bibliotecas. Os recomiendo descargaros un reciente informe que ha elaborado sobre los retos de las bibliotecas públicas en la era digital. La verdad es que es bastante extenso, pero está muy bien estructurado. El Ministerio lo ha traducido recientemente al español, me imagino que lo liberaréis, ya está, ¿vale? Está en inglés, pero lo tendréis también en castellano. Y de la manera que vamos a hacer esta intervención, en primer lugar, él va a hacer una exposición, que básicamente es lo que os encontraréis en este informe, y luego Roger y yo tendremos un pequeño debate. All yours. Robert, welcome to Burgos. You're on stage.
Buenas tardes. That's about all the Spanish you're going to hear from me. I'm going to speak about the future of the public library. Javier has asked me to convey to you the mistakes that have been made in the public libraries in the United States in preparing for the future. However, I only have 30 minutes. And so I decided instead to talk about how libraries in Spain, the United States, and across the world will face a very challenging future. I'm going to say that we have two paths that we can follow. A path of stability and then decline and irrelevance, or a path of disruptive change, renewal, reinvention, and continued relevance to the future of our communities. So let me begin by starting with a history of the library. We've heard about the Earth's memory, which goes back thousands of millions of years. We've heard about archaeological memory, which goes back millions of years. And now I'm going to talk about human recorded memory, which just goes back thousands of years. In fact, it goes back only 5,500 years since man first figured out how to capture memory in a way that was transmissible over time and space. So let me take you very quickly through a history of the human document and, coincidentally, a history of the library. It begins 3,500 years ago in the area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq, then maybe Mesopotamia, or Sumer as it was called, with this clay tablet in which someone or some group of people very cleverly figured out how to keep records of business transactions, trade, exchange, eventually also of political history and religion. That tablet, in its place of origin, was reproduced many times, many different tablets for many different records, and they were kept in something that looks very much like this IKEA bookcase. Simple wooden structure. And those shelves are the first libraries, or if you want to be strict, archives. So when you invent the human document, you also invent a form of archive. For the next 5,000 years, documents and libraries were few in number and few in location and accessible to few people. The technology changed from clay tablets to papyrus, to parchment, to codexes, but all of it was handcrafted. And all of it was kept primarily in the place where it originated. Yes, there were copies made by scribes and being a scribe was a very high office. But this was a very special thing, a document in those days, for 5,000 years. And then in 1450, 1455, Gutenberg introduced the industrial age of documents. By inventing the printing press, he moved from a craft era into a mechanical era. It was the first industrial revolution, if you wish, because now instead of having rare documents, we could take something that had been done by scribes and produce a Bible that looked like it had been done by scribes, but using a printing press. And along with that came the first libraries that we would recognize as such, libraries in universities and other cloistered places where documents were collected. And now we entered an era where instead of a few documents in a few places, you have many documents in many places. And at that point, the growth of books, the growth of libraries took off. And we now, during this era of the next 500 years, libraries and books and documents increased very rapidly, but there were still many copies in many places. Somewhere along this line, the public library was invented in the United States and in England around 1830, 1840, the first public libraries. I don't know where it was when it was in Spain, but probably in that same era. So we've had two revolutions that affect libraries. The first revolution, the actual invention of writing. The second revolution, the invention of the printing press. Now, the third revolution is occurring now. In the year 2007, what we call the iPhone was invented. Now, it's funny to think of this as a revolutionary device. But this is not a phone, this is a computer. And this is a computer that connects to the internet. And through this computer, I can access the entire world's knowledge, and I can carry this in my pocket. It's my reference librarian. As I work through Burgos, I can find out about the history of the cathedral here. I don't have to go to a reference librarian. I don't have to look it up in a book. I carry it with me. If I want to read a book, which is a little awkward on that, I take this. Now, why do I hold this up as the instance of a computer rather than the computers that have been in libraries for a long time? The difference is, this is portable. This is a computer that I don't have to go to the library for. It is direct access, and the document, instead of being few, as in the first era, many, as in the second era, the document is now virtual. It's everywhere. It's in my jacket. I can carry it in my pockets. And that's the third challenge to librarians, the third revolution. It's the revolution we are facing now, starting in 2007. We're at the very beginning. And what I'm going to be telling you about is how do we address it? Is the future going to be a continued arrow upward? Is it going to be a leveling off of the use of the library, but it will remain in some way a valid memory of the past? Or is the library as we know it now going to decline? So, what I'm going to be asking is, the library in the 21st century, will it disappear? Will it survive, or will it thrive? Let's be just a little more detailed about the challenge that the library faces. There are actually 4 challenges. I've listed them on this slide, but in the interest of of time, I'm going to skip this slide and go through each one of those bullet points individually. So the first one is digitization. That's what this represents, the iPhone and iPad. But that's not the end of the revolution, it's only the beginning. And perhaps you've heard of Google Glasses, Google Goggles they're called, where you can actually see in your eyepiece what you would normally look at your iPhone to see. So what I've said here on this slide is that all of the technologies that contribute to making these devices are going to continue to evolve. Secondly, the software that we have been so aware of is going to become less and less evident. We now have apps on our phone, which are much easier to use than the programs in our computer, and it'll be an app-like world. Much of our data and much of our computing will be in the cloud, accessible by the internet, but we don't have to carry it around with us. And combinations of media, graphics, text, audio, video, in one medium will become more and more common. So that we are going to see a world in which media, by which I mean documents of all form, will be accessible anywhere, anytime, and at low cost. Anywhere, anytime, at a low cost. The second challenge, apologize for all the lines here, but the point I'm trying to make is very simple. On the left side, I've listed the elements of the ecosystem of documents that we're used to, of media. They're the local bookstores, the reference librarians, reference books, books themselves, the publishers, the stacks, the disks, the files, and libraries. And on the right side, you can see the things that are happening to each of them. The local bookstore is being replaced by the internet bookstore in many places. In the United States in particular, I buy my books from Amazon.com. Reference librarians are being replaced by search engines. Book publishers are being replaced by self-publishing books by ebooks. I won't bother to take the time to go through that whole list, but my point is clear. The entire ecosystem, the arrangement of institutions that we've been used to as the background for our libraries and the environment in which we work is changing. Can the library be the one fixed point, the one place that is unchanged? So let's say the third change in the United States, the third challenge, is a demographic one. I know that you have similar but slightly different problems, but I'm talking from a United States perspective, so allow me that privilege. The United States population now is somewhat over 300 million. By the middle of the century, it'll be over 400 million. It's a population with 20% immigrants at that point. 30% of our population will be Hispanic in origin, mainly from Latin America. And we will have 20% of our population seniors. I think I saw that in Spain that number will be 30%. And of course, I do not have to speak in Spain about financial stringency. This is probably very much in the forefront of your concerns at this very moment. At every level of government, there are budgetary stringencies. So we face 4 challenges. 2 of them are things that libraries have dealt with before, demographic change and financial stringency. But 2 of them are the true revolutions that mean we have to change the way we do business. The first is digitization, and the second is the media ecosystem shift, embodied in these 2 devices that I showed you before, and the network of infrastructure in the internet and elsewhere. So these kinds of challenges demand revolutionary change. To summarize this slide, the red line is all I'm going to read. It says, revolutionary challenges require reinvention of the organization, reinvention of the library. So let's start with the contemporary library. I'll call it the 20th century library. What is it? How would I characterize it? First of all, it's focused on its collection. As a librarian, you're very proud, I hope, of the books, the DVDs, the CDs, all the media that you have available for your patrons in your library, very carefully selected. And you, as a librarian, were trained in how to organize, choose, and provide and service that collection. Secondly, it's very much focused on a facility, a particular library building, where most of the collection resides. And third, very much focused on the individual. You, as a librarian, are serving your patrons. Usually, I know it's not entirely, but usually one by one. The model of the library is patrons come in. You have collected all the good books and other media. Patrons come in and charge them out and take them out and enjoy them. That's a benefit that everybody has. So what are the competitive advantages of this model? First of all, people. The librarian is a great advantage. You're well trained, you're trained for service. I often say that a library is one of the few places you can enter with a smile, be served with a smile, and leave with a smile. It's almost universally a well-appreciated public service, unlike many other public services. It's got beautiful facilities, if not beautiful in abstract sense, but beautiful relative to the community in which you live. The price can't be beat, it's free. Librarians and libraries have principles about privacy, about access, and about freedom of use. Most communities in the United States, and I'm sure here in Spain, take great pride in their libraries. And finally, a library is a place where you can come and do many things because it provides a lot of different services regarding media. So now, how do we respond to this third revolution? Here are a series of dimensions of choice. In a sense, these are places where you can draw a slider across to choose how you're going to balance. And because of the shortness of time, I'm going to go a little more quickly through this than I would like. But the first dimension of choice is between a library is totally physical, both in its facility and in its books. And you can imagine nowadays a totally virtual library, which exists on the internet and has only digital materials. Somewhere along this line, a balance between those two models needs to be struck. I mentioned the individual focus. I'm going to talk a lot more about community focus, where the library deals with not just individuals in the community, but the community as a whole and as subgroups within it. I mentioned the collection focus. The opposite of that in this case is what I'll call a creation focus. More and more libraries in the United States are bringing into the library opportunities for people to create media. There's a Chicago library that has teenagers come in and create music videos as a way of bringing them into the library and move onward. But there are many, many other applications. And then there's the archival use of the library and the portal. By portal, I mean access to opportunities and facilities outside of the library, but you come to the library and use it as it's your means of access. So let's look at making those choices. The current model of the library is, in my view, inside out. We start with the collection and we look out to the world and expect the world to come to us. The library delivers media to its patrons. And if I take the choices that one might make on those dimensions, it's very much to the left side, tilted toward physical and individual focus, focused on its collection, and having an archival function. Now, if we look to the 21st century library, the reinvented library, the focus will be different. Instead of the collection outward, it will be the community's needs inward. The library responds to community needs for its services. And now, if I draw a diagram here, we see a balance between physical and virtual, which probably moves even further toward the virtual. That is, many of its resources will be on the web, accessible by the community through the web, even though it will still retain a fair amount of physical resources and a physical activity. Much more, this is my key point, much more of a focus on the community. I'll try to say what I mean by that. Much more engaged with creation as well as collection, and a balance between the archival function and the portal function. So the overall image of a 21st century library will be an informational, social, and cultural hub providing benefits to all members of its community. Now, what do I mean by meeting community needs? The library has always met community needs for access to information, and that will continue. The first two lines here talk about the library as a source and guide, an informed guide for the rich resources not only available within the library, but for the world outside. That means librarians have to understand that world much more deeply even than they now do. A key role of the library has been an equalizer of opportunity, meaning all through your community, you hope that people who need the knowledge that they can't individually afford can come to the library and get it. That will continue even when the knowledge is available on the web for free to some people, but not so readily to others. The library can play the role in the community of equalizing access. At a time like today, like now, of economic difficulty, the library has an important role to help its community adapt to change, to provide resilience through, well, in the United States, help for individuals in job search, help for the community on identifying new industries and businesses that can come, supporting entrepreneurs in the community by helping them gain access to data they need, providing workshops on starting a business, all of those things that the library can do to help its community adapt to change. It can be a supporter of creativity and a showcase for talent. I talked at a library in a small state last week where they have a writers community and they meet regularly at the library and use the library as a focal point for their own creativity. And many libraries have art displays for local artists. It can be a facilitator of communication among groups in the community, whether they be students interested in a particular subject, or chess club, or people who want to learn more a language, for example. All of that kind of social networking, which we see on the web, can also and very powerfully occur at a library in person. And it can be a preserver of memories and a window on the world. A lot needs to be done to achieve that model in its full scope. And I know my time is short, so I'm just going to say very quickly, much has to be done to digitize the libraries for materials that are born digital, which are created digitally. The library has to be able to access and provide access to them, as well as digitizing. And I know Europeana is very much engaged with that activity, so I won't spend more time on it. Librarian competencies are going to have to increase, and I'm sure every librarian in this audience is already engaged in developing deeper knowledge about the many capabilities of the internet and other resources now available. If any of you ever have the good fortune to renovate or build a new library, and I know in times of stringency that's not on the front of your agenda, but when that happens, maintaining flexibility, not building in permanent stacks, not building in permanent walls, not building in permanent furniture, because we do not know how the next 30 or 40 years is going to play out. We have to make flexibility. To the extent that you can achieve that, I urge you to plan for it. Much more collaboration and consolidation. We're going to have to invent new ways of doing things. It's a shame, and it happens in the US, that each library does it by themselves. It seems to me there's so much to be gained by libraries banding together as innovative groups to develop new ideas, share them, and make them more widely available. And I think what we're seeing here as this group may be the basis for such sharing. A lot more personalization and social networking, archiving and cataloging of local materials, and I saw some videos outside about that work being done in Romania and in Finland, so I'm sure many of you are already engaged with that, and maintaining your pricing at the best price, free. So in conclusion, the future 21st century library will be community-focused, not individual-focused, but community-focused, not collection-focused, but focused on the needs of the community. They will work from the outside in rather than inside out. It will be resilient to changes in the external environment, and it will use its skilled staff, flexible facilities, and technology to identify and serve the evolving needs of its community. In sum, in my last slide, I have a very positive view, but it's a very hard task ahead, that with the attention starting now of every librarian, understanding that they must lay out a path to the future, the library will survive, and even more, will thrive by serving the needs of its community, by bringing the community into the library and becoming its creative center. And thank you very much. This is available on the web.
Thank you, Robert. I'm sorry I was so straight on keeping the time, but as you know, we're going to be rescued by the Germans, so we have to start behaving like them. And also, lunch is at 2:30, and I don't want any of these guys to hate you during the rest of the conference because we're keeping away from lunch. We have time for basically 10-15 minutes debate. I think you've done a very good introduction in terms of the challenge ahead. I share with you your view that yes, there is a future for public libraries. Nevertheless, I have a pessimistic or more critical point of view. With all these scenarios that you describe, do you really think in the digital age there is going to be a place for public libraries?
For public libraries? Yes, of course I do. That's the story I made. And I also say that it is not a place that we will arrive at by accident.
Okay.
It's a place that requires careful thought. And I am well aware that thinking strategically about the future is not something that library boards in the United States do very well. Collaboration on innovation, while no library that I know of has ever hesitated to share its innovations with other libraries, but there's no mechanism by which the innovation that is made in Library A is readily shared with Library C, especially if it's a different part of the country. So I think if I were to say what are the things that need to be done, I think every librarian here needs to go back to his or her library and put in place with his board or council or whatever is the governing mechanism, some process of thinking about the future. The document that has been translated into Spanish lays out a process. I don't say it's the only process, but it's at least one that you might want to take a look at.
So your message is either we do it because no one else is going to do it for us.
That's right.
And in your document that I think, as you were describing, is very well organized, there's one section that you focus a lot on community because of time constraints, but there's one that I think is key to success, which is this whole idea going from a collection public library to a creation public library. And especially what we're seeing in the US, that I think is going to happen in Spain as well, that publishers do not like libraries anymore. Yes. They see libraries as a competitor of their bookstores and their sales channels. So therefore, they're not giving their content to public libraries, or they're giving it at a very high price. And I think we're going to see something similar in Spain, where even with the financial budget constraints, public libraries are not going to be able to offer commercial books, let's put it that way. So we start thinking about creating our own content so we can offer the community things that are relevant locally instead of just being a provider of commercial content. Do you think that should be a focus, a way to go?
I think creativity in many ways, not only providing content, but providing a place where creative people can actually create. As I mentioned, the authors group at this library in a small state in the United States, by coming together at the library, they have access to the facilities of the library, but they also create an energy. And if there are a graphic design community, if there's a legal community who want to work together to do something, I think the library is the resource, the creative center, or can be the creative center of the community. Not only creative in the arts sense, but creative in the solving community problem sense.
Okay, during your speech and during our conversation, we have mentioned buildings, content, service, but we forgot something very important, people. This room is full of people, live people, and as I said before, now we know also there's a lot of the people behind us, below us. What do these people have to do in the next very few years to change basically their profile in order to be able to do all those things that you tell them they have to do in order to survive? Are they going to be able?
Well, I think that's the real challenge. I've been involved in many organizations that have gone through tremendous change, and there's always a profile of people, some of whom find it very difficult to change in any way, shape, or form, some who are very active and excited about participating in change. Knowing that libraries are civil service organizations, I know that many people, even if they don't want to change, will be a part of the library forever, or until they retire. On the other hand, new people will eventually come in. I think there's a combination of, practically speaking, training, and again, there's something that the library community can do, is to work out ways to train themselves. What are the skills they need? What's the information of how can you best help your customers, your patrons, in finding the information they need on the internet? What do you need to know? And does each librarian have to learn that by his or herself? I hope not. I hope the library community can come together and arrange a subgroup or a group that is involved.
Actually, the way most libraries have worked in Spain, and I think in many countries, has been in silos. You know, I have my content, which is basically a replica of maybe 5 miles away public library with basically the same content, same services. In your document, you talk about specializing in areas and in services, and you don't have to give everything from your public library. Maybe you reach an agreement with other libraries across the country, or maybe worldwide. We have to think that internet has no frontiers. Why not creating, of course, in Spanish?
Absolutely. And collaboration, community. I mentioned at dinner the other night that I would love to see a league of innovative libraries. Libraries who agree that they are going to innovate, but who band together to share experience. And it would be completely voluntary, so that, in a sense, by joining, you'd say, I'm not going to have my own silo. But what you were referring to is the fact that one library in a community, in an area, might be the place that focuses on mystery novels and has the collection and has the knowledgeable librarians. So another library somewhere in the region or somewhere else, as Javier says, somewhere across the world, might get in touch with this library when one of their readers or patrons is interested in finding a particular kind of mystery. And that's not maybe the best, but maybe the Finnish book collection is in one place, and if anyone wants to find a finished book, they know that that particular library. So if libraries were to specialize in different areas, then as a whole, they could have a tremendous knowledge base, but what part of the knowledge that the librarian locally would have is where is the knowledge that can help my patron find. So the librarian becomes a guide and a mentor, but the resources are all over Spain or all over the world. That's the only way libraries are going to survive. And Mr. Johnson, the English writer, said, the thread of hanging in the morning wonderfully concentrates one's mind. The thread of hanging in the morning wonderfully concentrates one's mind. Meaning, when you look ahead and see the death or serious problems, you really have to think very carefully. I think the public library is in threat, is in danger. Not today, not 5 years from today, but 10 years. And that is why you have to start now. You cannot wait. You cannot think everything is going to go along. We adopted the computer in the 90s and 80s. Nothing happened bad. It was just an expansion of our use. These devices that I was holding up are a revolutionary change, and they're going to affect every library.
No, I fully agree with you with that thinking that you're doing. As you said before, computers were embedded in public libraries in a very natural way, and many other devices. But for the first time, there is a new way we access information, but not only access, the way we consume it and the way we participate or create, that new content. And it's bypassing, bookstores, libraries, all these different agents that we had in previous scenarios. Do you really think, going back to the first question, that there is room for this kind of entities in this new digital area, that from one device you can access and connect to everyone? You do not need a place to basically tell you where to look or suggest you. Do you really think that's going to be needed?
No, that's why I say the library is different in the future, why it's community focused on needs. If you're in a community which is undergoing an economic transformation and you have a lot of people wanting job help, they may not have access to even a good smartphone. They may not know how to apply for a job. They may not have access to information about what's available. The library needs to understand what is needed in its community, and that means librarians, in particular the head librarian, needs to be a person who goes out into the community and serves on whatever community organizations and is very much in touch. Now, I don't know about librarians in Spain, but that's not the typical model of a librarian in the United States, who's very much focused on his or her library.
So listening to you, maybe we should start thinking about changing the name library into more a community center. That's where you're heading?
I will give $100 or 100 euros to anyone in this room who could suggest a word that conveys what I have in mind besides library. I've been trying to find something, and I haven't really come up with it, but it would be very nice to have a word that has some resonance of library so people know that there's a continuity, but which conveys this somewhat different sense. Because it's not only a matter of libraries changing, it's a matter of conveying to the public how they've changed. It's marketing, if you wish. There needs to be
also its main asset, the books, are changing. And I mean, a digital book, probably 6 years from now, we will not call it a book. It could be like a video game that is telling a story.
Exactly.
Therefore, if the main asset of a library is going to change into something that we will probably call it a book for the next 5 years, maybe 10 years from now we'll call it something else until we'll find that, whatever new name. So I think it's a very healthy, exercise to start thinking, what's going to be the way we're going to define ourselves, because we're not going to be libraries anymore. We're going to be this community creation center, point of encounter.
Physical social network. I mean,
but you mentioned physical. Do we need buildings?
No, well, we don't need one single building. I mean, in the United States, again, there's
There's no budget for maintenance anymore, so that's why I'm asking.
I'm sure that there will be libraries without buildings and also serving functions. It's a question of what the physical, whether they need to be linked to a specific community. I think, though, from my model of a community library, building is important because I'm thinking of people coming together. When I say a social network, a physical social network, I mean as opposed to the virtual social network that Facebook represents, I'm talking face-to-face rather than Facebook. And I know that there's a great hunger for that even in the world of Facebook and other social networking, a place where community groups of various kinds can come together and use the resources that a library has. Maybe that it has a book printer. It may be that it has a 3D printer where you can make sculptural items. It may be that it just has great big displays that link to the world and enable you to have the equivalent of a Skype conference with another community in the United States or in Latin America on a subject of common interest. I mean, it should be a window on the world. It should be a guide to that window. There's plenty of things for libraries to do. They just have to get out of the habit of thinking of themselves as the guardian of a collection of books and more as a community service that can meet many of the knowledge needs of the community in a way no other resource can. And that will challenge librarians.
It was a huge challenge. You mentioned during your presentation, and I agree with you, that librarians is one of the few institutions that still has principles. We have realized that, well, we always doubted that banks had principles as well as politicians. And it's true that, from a community point of view, from a society point of view, librarians are perceived as people who have civil servant principles, freedom, privacy, access. Do you really think that those principles are still valuable in the 21st century? Do your community still looking for someone to defend those principles? Or the economic angle and the economic interest of all these corporations that are defining this new digital age are basically eroding all of those? I haven't seen people standing up for those principles anymore.
Well, I think in the United States, librarians still do, and the American Library Association certainly does. It's very active. It's a big national organization with 20 or 30,000 members, and they have a lot of influence, maybe not as much as some organizations, but they have a voice in Washington. So they certainly do feel it's one of their goals, and we have very strong civil liberties organizations in the United States which also feel so. But you're right, there are powerful forces eroding those freedoms and those principles, which makes it even more important that librarians and the library communities stand up to the extent they can.
I fully agree with you, because if they don't do it, there's basically no one else or few left to do it. Before we go to lunch, antes de irnos a comer, si alguien quiere hacer una pregunta, dado que tenéis la oportunidad de tener aquí a Roger, encantados de daros la palabra. También a través de Twitter, vale. Entonces estoy como la niña del exorcista, dando aquí la vuelta, vale. Justo ahora no hay ninguna. Si hay alguien, ahí tenemos una. Gracias. Esto es el momento del directo, siempre cuando... No soy multitarea, como habéis visto, yo estaba centrado en mi conversación.
Buenas tardes, iré rápido porque es tarde y aunque es muy, muy interesante, también hay hambre. En su interesante presentación ha hablado un poco de los precios en las bibliotecas. ¿Nos podría dar 3 o 4 titulares que piense que son importantes para el futuro de las bibliotecas públicas en cuanto al precio, a los precios? Gracias.
Yes, the bullet point on my slide referred to the fact that the tradition of a free service is a very important element of the library, and I would hate to see it erode. I can imagine, however, special ways in which the library can find the ability to charge a price for something that it's either currently free or more likely something that is not a service already offered but could be offered for a charge. I mentioned, for example, the notion of a 3D printer. I don't know how many of you know what that is, but it's a device that allows you to create physical objects like you would a copier. And that is something that libraries don't currently use. It has an expense associated with it, both for materials and for the object. And it's conceivable to me that a library could introduce pricing for something like that. certainly for book printers, which are available in libraries in the United States, perhaps for certain kinds of special services. But the reason that one of the major benefits of a library is equality of access to everyone in the community. I would hate to see pricing introduced in a way that it would disadvantage people with not so much access to financial resources. If it were, however, pricing for, in some way, a progressive system in which people who could afford it paid something. Even that, I think, shows up through the tax system and needn't be replicated in the library. So I would say that the principle of retaining free access to as much of the collection as possible is a very important element of libraries. It should not be given up lightly.
Listening to your response, there are many different business models. One of them is the famous freemium. You know, some part of the service is free, others are paid. Do you think that kind of model can be incorporated in libraries, that we offer, you know, basic free services, but they're premium services that users must pay for?
First of all, I think what we're in a stage now of thinking creatively about the future. I've laid out one possibility, but I think people should be free to think of others. But this should be an age of ferment, where we experiment and try different things. So I wouldn't take freemium, the notion of giving something free as a base service and then charging more for a higher level of service, should be excluded. It should be explored, but behind all of that, whoever is doing the exploration and the choice should bear in mind the high principle of free access. And what I'm afraid about even exploring freemium, I'm slightly modifying my answer now. Once the politicians, the people who support libraries, get a taste of that idea, they may find it hard to let go. So I would be a little cautious about following that step without a great many thoughts and protections.
Well, Twitter follows you. We have room for just one more question before we go to lunch. I think people are hungry. Let's see. Actually, before we go, during our conversation last week, you mentioned that when libraries are the few places, public places, where you walk in and they greet you with a smile. The slogan of the city is "A smile, you're in Burgos," and there's a couple of tweets saying, "A smile, you're in Burgos, a smile, you're in a library." So welcome to Burgos, welcome to Spain, and thank you very much.
And I'm smiling.
Muchas gracias.